I would like to first give sincere thanks and appreciation for the government and people of Mauritius for hosting this very important conference and for the warm hospitality they have accorded to all participants. The Economic Commission for Africa is delighted to jointly organize the 17th session of the African Economic Conference in partnership with the African Development Bank and UNDP to contribute in addressing the transformational challenges that the continent faces. The theme of this year's conference, focusing on supporting climate-smart development in Africa, is quite timely, as it comes right after the COP27 that was held in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, a month ago, and that was seen as an African COP focused on implementation. This conference provides us an opportunity to digest, synthesize the discussions that we had at COP27 and propose recommendations for how to support climate-smart development in Africa. We're meeting at a time when African economies have actually been facing tsunami of global shocks, emanating from the COVID-19 pandemic, then the war in Ukraine, and exacerbated by the challenges posed by climate change that is hard-hitting for African countries and communities. We know how the COVID-19 had disproportionate impact on the continent, pushing 55 million people into extreme poverty and really reversing hard-won gains that have been achieved over the earlier 2 decades. It increased new poor by 55 million and added 46 million people to those at risk of hunger and malnutrition. Then we were hit by the war in Ukraine, which compounded economic uncertainties affecting low and middle income countries. This included the impact of increasing fuel prices, disruptions in supply chains, and also impacted access to markets and disrupted African food systems. The situation is even further exacerbated by increasing and adverse impact of climate change on the continent, which poses existential threat to the continent and could reverse some of the SDGs progress that has been achieved and aspirations of the African Union's Agenda 2063. Africa needs to close huge development gaps by investing substantially in key sectors, such as energy, agriculture, transport, water, among others. These sectors are very vulnerable to the adverse impacts of climate change. The annual economic costs of extreme weather events in Africa are projected at 45 to 50 billion US dollars by 2040. And up to 70% of Africa's annual GDP on average by the year 2100. These challenges put Africa in a quite difficult development position. The continent needs trillions of dollars to close huge development gaps. For example, it's estimated that investment in the order of 170 billion US dollars per year needed to come from private sector for key infrastructure areas. So how can we build confidence that these investments will deliver services and not become stranded by climate change impacts? i.e., how can we have climate smart development? 47 African countries have so far submitted their revised nationally determined contributions to climate action ahead of the global stocktaking on climate actions next year under the UNFCCC process. These nationally determined contributions require close to $3 trillion to implement. But African countries need support to translate their NDCs into bankable investments and projects that can attract financing from the private sector. And this is particularly so when these NDCs are revised to enhance ambition with clean energy, climate smart agriculture, and green industrialization actions that can readily attract ESG financing. In fact, the Economic Commission for Africa has been working on SDG 7 initiative for Africa, which has demonstrated that this, with the issuance last year by PEMCO and South Africa of 3 billion rand local currency green bond to support investments in renewables in the country. But for more of these investments to actually happen, countries must also take the effort to address policy and regulatory challenges, to remove barriers to investment, and with the de-risking tools and instruments, as well as with capacity for enhanced liquidity that reduces sovereign cost of borrowing, as has been illustrated by the Liquidity and Sustainability Facility that the Economic Commission for Africa recently created and is now fully operational and independent. Other areas of support that ECA has been providing member states include, and we have a large variety, but let me just highlight a few, include work with partners on sustainable energy for all to support development of just transition plans in countries. It also includes work with partners to leverage the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement to use Africa's abundant clean energy resources to transform minerals and produce electric battery precursors in DRC. It also includes the implementation of the sustainable budgeting approaches and helping countries roll them to help improve mainstreaming of climate resilience into budgetary process. And it also includes work on Great Blue Wall and on debt for nature and debt for climate swaps. Our work also included supporting the development of carbon markets in Africa through creating common registry and harmonizing protocols to facilitate resource mobilization through voluntary carbon markets. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, climate smart development in Africa is the only development model that will unleash the continent's potential to achieve its development aspirations. It is possible, especially in the context of strengthened multilateralism, to tackle climate change and eradicate poverty. But African countries must build sustainable and resilient economies by enhancing their design and implementation of credible macroeconomic frameworks, must reduce dependence on external debt, take advantage of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement to really accelerate industrialization and diversification. They need to ensure a just and equitable energy transition that capitalizes on the continent's abundant renewable energy resources and critical minerals. They need to build agricultural and food systems that are resilient to external shocks. And they need to invest in production and uptake of climate information services, as well as early warning systems. Many papers have been submitted to this conference on these matters, and I take this opportunity to thank all the young researchers who have put a lot of hard work in bringing their research to this conference. We also have many exciting and insightful plenary sessions that will shed light on much more on addressing issues of climate change and development in Africa. And I'm really excited to follow the various sessions and look very much forward to the outcomes of the 17th session of the African Economic Conference. Thank you for your attention.